Thank you, Mays. Thank you for an amazing time. It is an amazing moment to be in this space with you. I want to thank the organizers, Aaron and Sandrine, who worked so hard to make this possible. I want to thank the invisible labor, the people we don't see, who are making this event possible. You know, I'm a text preacher, so I have my notes. I'm going to read them. Is that all right? I've struggled with what I want to say to you. Over the last few weeks, years really, in the United States, we've had to struggle with the ugliness of evil. Innocent people shot down in a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, by a young man who believed that white people in the United States are being replaced. Imagine a grandmother, 86 years old, who has lived a full life confronting death in this manner. Imagine her family, the grief. And then there was the slaughter in Uvalde, Texas. 19 children and 2 teachers murdered by another young man with an AR-15. Babies gone. A husband dies of grief. Parents lost in a fog because God has puzzled them. And yet politicians and fellow Americans argue over the accessibility of guns as families bury their dead. They choose coffins for their children. Conservatives dig in their heels as they defend the right of an 18-year-old to own a weapon of war. Liberals demand common sense gun laws, but nothing changes. Nothing ever changes in this place that claims to be a beacon of democracy. Or to paraphrase James Baldwin, America changes all the time without ever changing at all. And just think about it. This has happened against the backdrop of unimaginable horror, the unimaginable horror of a pandemic that has left over 1 million Americans dead. This is not an abstraction. These are mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, friends, brothers and sisters, people we love. We are so atomized in the United States that we've had to grieve alone. So divided into our individual silos that even the idea of the loss of 1 million people could not bring us together. The sphere of moral concern has narrowed. The place where I live, the place that likes to think of itself as the darling of divine providence, is so overrun by selfishness and greed and hatred that we could not muster the will to respond appropriately. 1 million dead and counting. The toxic combination of selfishness and greed and hatred has slowly poisoned our way of life. The moral infrastructure of America is crumbling. The bridges of concern and fellow feeling towards one another are collapsing. The very idea of a robust conception of the public good has fallen to the wayside as an economic philosophy has turned us into what? Self-interested persons in competition and rivalry with each other in pursuit of our own aims and ends. Y'all with me? Now, you combine all of that with the belief that some people, because of the color of their skin, ought to be valued more than others. And we're left in the place where I'm from, with the country fighting a cold civil war and eating its entrails at the same time. What do we do in the face of it all? In the face of babies and grandmothers lying in pools of blood, what do we do? How do we muster the courage to fight for a better world, for a different way of being together as the bodies continue to pile up around the world? I found myself not too long ago reaching for Frantz Fanon's 1963 classic, The Wretched of the Earth. I taught it in my graduate seminar on the African American intellectual tradition. And of course, we struggled with Fanon's view of violence, his description of the Manichaean world of the colonizer and the colonized, and his prophetic warning about the limits of a certain kind of nationalism, and his understanding of the transformative power of national struggle. But what struck me after all of these years of reading Fanon was the aspirational gesture in his chapter on national culture. Against the backdrop of liberation struggles, in the context of the traumas experienced and lived, Fanon called for a new humanism. Out of the ruins of the West, he declared, there must be a new kind of human being. One doesn't have to agree with Fanon's politics or his view of the role of violence to understand the significance of what he commends. We have to imagine the world differently. We have to be differently. And this doesn't require us to ignore the past or the ugliness of the present. It doesn't require us to shift still within a neoliberal framework and declare well-being as if it's some narcissistic self-concern. Oh, did y'all hear me? This doesn't require us to ignore the past or to ignore the present. The world as it ought to be must be imagined close to the ground in the world as it is. If we don't, hubris will hollow out our dreams. In this time of storm and stress, if a new way of being together is to emerge, we must understand that the imagination is the battlefield. To imagine a new humanism requires of us, of you and me, an honest confrontation with the ugliness of who we are, with the wounds that fester, all rooted in what we have done. No more lies. No more lies. And in the context of the place where I'm from, to echo James Baldwin, we must crack the American image and find out and deal with what it hides. In a commencement address delivered at St. Lawrence University in 1984, the late novelist Toni Morrison told the graduates to dream the world as it ought to be. To dream the world as it ought to be. To imagine that no one should die because they can't afford health care. That every child, no matter the color of their skin or their zip code, should get a quality education. That every human being should be accorded dignity and standing and should be treated equally under the law. That no one should be seen as disposable. These are not the musings of radical madmen and women. This kind of world is possible. Morrison would say it was necessary. Necessary, quote, because if you don't feed the hungry, they will eat you. We must imagine a different way of being together. Our scars and bruises, The pain and wounds demand as much. We have to break loose from the ideologies that have shackled us to the ground and dare to think for ourselves, funded by the experiences of the past. Each generation, Fanon said, must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. Our mission, I believe, is to imagine a new world, a new humanism close to the ground. I often find myself these days reaching for help, trying to beat back the despair and panic, to respond to what feels like cascading crises that threaten to overwhelm. Again, I've struggled to what to say to you in this moment, to offer hope amid the storms, and the storms seem to always come. Ironically, William Faulkner's Nobel Peace Prize comes to mind. Nobel Prize, he wouldn't be a Peace Prize winner, but his Nobel Prize come to mind. Faulkner said, I decline to accept the end of man. Quote, it is easy enough to say that man is immortal simply because he will endure, that when the last ding-dong of doom has clanged and faded from the last worthless rock hanging tideless in the last red and dying evening, that even then there will still be one more sound, that of his puny, inexhaustible voice still talking. I refuse to accept this. I believe that man will not merely endure, he will prevail. He is immortal, not because he alone among creatures has an inexhaustible voice, but because he has a soul, a spirit capable of compassion and sacrifice and endurance. But if this is to be so, Wellbeing Conference, if this is to be so, Faulkner suggested, we must not forget the problems of the human heart. We mustn't forget the fears that drive us to idols and to the illusions of safety. If we do so, as he wrote, our griefs grieve on no universal bones. Our imaginations become surfaced and barren. We write not of the heart, but of the glands. We mustn't forget, I come out of a tradition that speaks to pain and suffering. Each of you is called to bear witness. Each of you is called to be a dream warrior, to risk everything right now in this moment to make the world anew. You are called to be that inexhaustible voice, to exhibit that spirit capable of compassion and sacrifice and endurance. Don't be selfish in the name of well-being. Fight for a better world. Do the work of being that inexhaustible voice and bring a new humanity into existence.